The enigmatic Keddie Cabin case. Imagine waking up on a quiet morning in a town so small that everyone knows your name, only to discover that, during the night, for lives are destroyed in silence. No one heard screams. No one saw anything. And worse, no one truly did anything afterward. In the early hours of April 12, 1981, in the remote town of Keddie, California, a place with fewer than 70 residents, Cabin 28 became the epicenter of one of the most disturbing unsolved American mysteries in history. 3 people were murdered with almost ritualistic brutality. A child vanished without a trace. And despite glaring clues, suspicious testimonies, and even hidden confessions, no one was ever convicted. What makes this case even more chilling isn't just the violence of the crime, but the fact that, for decades, authorities seemed to turn a blind eye. Was it a random attack, a hate crime, or something far darker, buried beneath local corruption and secrets? Today, we dive deep into the enigmatic Keddie Cabin case, one of the most haunting real American mysteries, defying logic, justice, and our very understanding of evil. And believe it or not, what happened there might be closer to the truth than you imagine. That night, Cabin 28 wasn't just an address. It was a tomb under construction. Glenna Sharp, 36, was trying to rebuild her life with her 4 children after a turbulent divorce. But instead of peace, she found horror. Her body was found bound with electrical wire, repeatedly bludgeoned in the head, and covered with a yellow blanket, as if the killer wanted to both hide her and honor her at the same time. Beside her, her 15-year-old son John and his 17-year-old friend Jane Wingate lay dead, with no chance to defend themselves. Someone entered, killed, and vanished. Sheila Sharp, 14, was the sole survivor, not through bravery, but by sheer chance. On the night of the massacre, she'd slept at a neighbor's house. When she returned the next morning, she found the door ajar, the smell of blood in the air, and a silence so heavy it seemed to scream. She ran, cried, called for help, but the authorities' response was slow, disorganized, and, as we later learned, filled with strange decisions. Why wasn't the crime scene secured immediately? Why weren't homicide specialists called in? Something felt wrong from the very first moment. And then there's Tina, the youngest daughter, just 12 years old, who wasn't among the bodies. No clues, no note, no trace. While investigators focused on the 3 victims, Tina became a haunting question mark hanging over everything. Until 3 years later, human remains were found 51 kilometers away in Feather Falls. With them were items directly linked to the girl: clothing, a blanket, and surgical tape identical to that used on the cabin victims. Someone took her, someone buried her, and someone did everything to ensure the truth would never surface. When investigators entered Cabin 28, they didn't just see a crime. They saw a ritual. All 3 victims were bound with electrical wire and duct tape, as if the killer had all the time in the world and a purpose beyond mere murder. Glenna was gagged with her own underwear, a deeply humiliating, almost intimate act. John and Jane showed head injuries, but no signs of struggle, suggesting they were attacked while asleep or already immobilized. Someone wanted total control, but it was a yellow blanket that left forensic experts unsettled. After bludgeoning Glenna to death, the killer covered her, a strangely compassionate gesture amid carnage. This detail sparked theories for decades. Was it remorse? A religious symbol? A distorted family custom? In Western culture, covering the dead is an act of respect. But here, it sounded like macabre irony. It was as if the killer whispered, "I killed you, but I still grant you dignity." That contrast between brutality and near pity is rare and profoundly disturbing. The entire scene felt staged. Nothing was stolen, no windows broken, no real signs of struggle. And yet, the violence was personal, visceral, especially toward Glenna, who suffered more than 40 blows. This wasn't the work of a burglar or a random stranger. It bore the mark of someone with deep-seated resentment, perhaps rejection, jealousy, or vengeance. The symbolism wasn't just theatrical, it was psychological, and it might just be the key to understanding not only who did it, but why. And that leads us straight to the door of a man everyone knew, but no one dared truly accuse. If there's a face that haunts the Keddie case, it's Martin Smart, a Vietnam War veteran, resident of Cabin 27, the neighbor Cabin 28, and stepfather to Justin, a child who was in the cabin that night. Martin was, by definition, one of their own, not an outsider, not a passing criminal, but part of the community itself. He had a known dislike for John Sharp, frequently exchanged insults with him, and, according to witnesses, erupted in sudden fits of rage. In a town where everyone knew each other, he was a neighbor everyone avoided, but no one reported. On the night of the murders, Martin was at the local bar with John Bobidge, another adult who would later be viewed with suspicion. Both returned late, but their alibis had cracks. While Bobidge claimed he went straight home, Martin arrived dirty, silent, and burned clothes in the stove, according to his wife Marilyn. She reported this to police, but the information was filed away as irrelevant. Worse, in 2016, a therapist revealed that years earlier, Martin had confessed to the massacre during a session, saying he couldn't live with it anymore. The 1981 police never knew, or chose to ignore it. What makes Martin so disturbing isn't just his temper, it's the timing. He had access to the cabin. He knew the family's routines. He knew Sheila would be sleeping elsewhere. And crucially, he disappeared from the area shortly after the massacre, leaving no trace. He died in 1990, never formally charged. But years later, a handwritten note surfaced in the sheriff's archives, perhaps not so anonymous, containing the chilling line, "I paved the lives of 4 people. Coincidence? Confession? Or yet another clue authorities chose to ignore? The answer may be buried, but it's not forgotten. When a brutal crime occurs in a small town, you'd expect the investigation to be especially meticulous. After all, everyone knows each other, resources are limited, and every mistake echoes for years. But in Keddie, the opposite happened. Sheriff Doug Thomas, instead of calling in homicide experts, brought in organized crime agents, a decision as strange as it was suspicious. Why treat a domestic massacre like a mafia hit? The official explanation was vague, but the rumors in town were clear. Someone wanted to divert attention, and the mistakes piled up. The crime scene was left unsecured for hours. Friends and curious onlookers came and went before forensics arrived. Evidence disappeared. Statements were poorly recorded or outright ignored, like Marilyn Smart's account of burn clothes, or the therapist's revelation of Martin's confession. Even worse, when the case was reopened in 2016, investigators discovered that physical evidence, including the tapes used to bind the victims, had been stored haphazardly, nearly destroyed by time. Was this negligence or something darker? Cover-up theories gain strength when we consider the local context. In the 1980s, Keddie had quiet ties to drug trafficking and illegal alcohol. John Sharp, John's father and Glenna's ex-husband, was known to have dangerous enemies. And the sheriff? He had close connections to figures who, today, seem to have motives to keep the case buried. When Greg Wood, a childhood friend of John Sharp, took over the investigation decades later, his accusation was blunt. Someone protected the killer. What if the truth wasn't hidden through incompetence, but through loyalty? For 3 long years, Tina Sharp was a ghost. While the world focused on the bodies in Cabin 28, the 12-year-old lingered as an unanswered question. Was she still alive? Had she run away? Was she kidnapped by an outsider? Hope, however fragile, remained until April 1984, when a recyclables collector named Ronald Pedrin found human bones near Feather Falls, over 50 kilometers from Keddie. The location was remote, desolate, and strangely symbolic. Someone took her there. Someone buried her. And someone wanted her found. We just don't know why. Beside the remains were unmistakable clues. A blanket matching the one from the crime scene, children's clothing that fit Tina, and, most chilling, surgical tape identical to that used to gag the cabin victims. The connection was clear, but what truly turned this discovery into a new chapter of the mystery was an anonymous phone call made to police just hours before the find. The caller gave precise coordinates, spoke in a muffled voice, and hung up without identifying themselves. To this day, no one knows who made that call. Late remorse? A rival trying to expose the killer? Or part of a more complex game? Tina's identity was confirmed through dental records, but her cause of death remained unclear. There was no obvious trauma to the bones. This raised a disturbing theory. What if she wasn't killed that night? What if she survived and was held captive for days, weeks, or even years? Some investigators believe her body was moved multiple times before its final burial. Every detail suggests Tina wasn't just a victim. She was a key piece. And whoever hit her might have been the same person who, in the end, decided the world needed to know she was dead. But why? The answer may be buried with her or alive in the mind of someone still breathing. In 2006, the case seemed doomed to obscurity. Dusty files, aging witnesses, and a traumatized community trying to move on. But in 2016, everything changed. The new Plumas County Sheriff, Greg Wood, who happened to be John Sharp's childhood friend, officially reopened the Cabin 28 massacre, and with him came a promise. This time, we won't look away. What followed was a wave of discoveries that seemed ripped from a thriller script, but were painfully real. The first bombshell came from the earth itself. An old, rusted hammer was found buried near Keddie by a local farmer. Forensic analysis showed its shape and weight matched exactly the skull fractures on the victims. But the most shocking breakthrough came from the lab. DNA recovered from the duct tape used to bind Glenna, John, and Jane was finally extracted using modern techniques. While it didn't yield a clear identity, the genetic profile ruled out several secondary suspects and brought Martin Smart back into the spotlight. Even more chilling, in the county's confidential archives, a handwritten letter surfaced dated 1982, with lines like, "I paid with the lives of 4 people, and I still carry it." The handwriting? Strikingly similar to Martin's. But the reopening didn't just bring evidence. It brought conflict. Greg would publicly accuse the original investigation of deliberate incompetence and suggested local figures had shielded the real killer. Some veteran officers defended themselves. Others refused to speak. Meanwhile, the $5,000 reward for information remains active, and on obscure internet forums, former residents swear that someone in town knows the truth. The question now isn't just who did it, but why. Even with DNA, hammers, and confessional letters, the case remains officially unsolved. Perhaps because the answer threatens to expose more than a murder. Maybe it threatens to expose a pact of silence. Keddie was never the same after that night. What was once a refuge for fishermen, veterans, and families seeking a fresh start became synonymous with fear and distrust. Residents moved away quietly. Homes were abandoned. The already tiny population shrank even further. Not from lack of resources, but from a collective trauma no one knew how to heal. The massacre didn't just claim 4 lives. It killed the soul of a place. And ironically, it was precisely that silence that made the case echo far beyond the California mountains. Cabin 28, the epicenter of horror, was demolished in 2004, as if erasing the location would erase the memory. But the opposite happened. The case inspired documentaries, podcasts, books, and theories on true crime forums. To many, Keddie became the perfect symbol of a real American mystery. Brutality hidden beneath the facade of simple rural life, institutional failures in forgotten communities, and the pain of families who never heard the word justice. The $5,000 reward remains active, not because authorities expect a miracle tip, but because, symbolically, they refuse to declare the case closed even without convictions. But Keddie's true legacy lies in the questions that still won't stop arising. Why were so many clues ignored? Why was Martin Smart never brought to trial? And above all, how many other Keddies exist in the backroads of America? Crimes forgotten not for lack of evidence, but for lack of voice? While Cabin 28 turned to dust, its enigma became legend. And legends, as we know, only die when no one remembers them anymore. But you're remembering, and that alone keeps the flame of truth alive. Over 40 years have passed. 4 lives are gone. A community shattered. Yet the Cabin 28 massacre remains officially unsolved. But the truth? It doesn't vanish just because authorities close a file. It waits. In forgotten archives, in the memories of witnesses, in the words of therapists who heard a confession, in the anonymous voice that guided police to Tina's bones. This isn't just one of the most disturbing, unsolved American mysteries. It's a mirror. It shows us what happens when silence becomes more comfortable than justice. When everyone knows but no one speaks becomes the rule. And maybe, just maybe, it's also asking you, if you had a clue, even a small one, would you come forward, or would you choose silence too? If this video made you think, question, or even lose sleep, then it's done its job. But don't stop here. Comment below. Who do you believe was the real killer? Martin Smart? An outsider? Or were multiple people involved? Your theory might be the missing piece. And if you want to dive deeper into more real American mysteries, unsolved U.S. cases, and historical enigmas that defy logic, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell, because the next story could be even darker, and the truth, as always, is hiding in plain sight. Don't let cases like Keddie be forgotten. Memory is the last form of justice that remains.